It's very rare that a game, especially an indie one, receives as much hype in the build-up to a mostly unknown release date. And after years of anticipation, Team Cherry finally released Hollow Knight Silksong to widespread fanfare, immediately receiving acclaim from both critics and fans alike despite the already high expectations, and considered more than a worthy follow-up to the 2017 original and a Game of the Year contender. Of course, with a challenging game like this comes a very challenging trophy list. Silksong has 34 trophies including the platinum. Most of them are tied to 100%ing the game, but there are some exceptions. These include obtaining all 5 different endings, each of them having a trophy tied to them. I'll also need to play the game at least 2 additional times for the speedrunning trophies. One of those speedruns will require 100%ing the game in under 30 hours, so I'll have to keep an eye on the game's layout if I want any chance of doing something like that, making for a grand total of at least 3 playthroughs, provided that I ace the speedrunning trophies on my first attempts. Of course, just like the first game, just beating the game, let alone obtaining the platinum trophy, will be no walk in the park. I also wanted to get the platinum without using a guide, as I wanted the end results to feel more rewarding, but that's just my view. And doing it this way means that I'll have to learn certain lessons from this game the hard way. The original Hollow Knight is one of my favourite games of all time, so it's natural that I feel both eager and cautious when going into a sequel with so much buzz around it. And while I pursue the platinum trophy, I wonder how doing so will affect my overall enjoyment of the game. Let's find out. Heads up, before starting, I will be spoiling the entirety of the game to showcase the platinum journey. You have been warned. We start off the game by taking control of Hornet, a character from the first game, who is shown to be captured before breaking free and falling into the land below. We wake up and get used to the controls, and immediately we can see some differences to the original, but I'll get more into that later. After making it through the first area and fighting the first boss of the game, we make it out of Mossfield and into a base called Bone Bottom. This is the first of 3 hub areas where we'll be able to rest and accept side quests in the form of wishes, which will also be required to 100% the game. But I'll get more into those later. Here, we learn that the people who captured Hornet were followers of the Citadel, which is located at the top of Pharloom. Pharloom is the setting of the game, and is noticeably bigger than Hollow Nest, which will be quite apparent quickly. Wanting some answers, Hornet decides to go to the Citadel to find some answers about her capture. Getting there is easier said than done, however. We'll need to make it through many different zones in Pharloom and encounter some interesting characters along the way, as well as defeat many dangers that are in Hornet's way. Early on in our journey, we head into a room and pick up an item which unlocks our first trophy for acquiring our first tool. The tools are a central component of the game's mechanics and help expand Hornet's range in both combat and world traversal. There are over 50 we'll need to find throughout the world if we want to achieve 100%. Needless to say that they are the biggest area when it comes to 100%ing this game. While exploring the first major area, the Marrow, we come across a zone where we bind with it. Doing so will give Hornet her first silk skill, which pops a trophy. There will be others we can find and obtain throughout the game, and yes, they will be required for 100%. Using the silk skill we found, we use it to free a large creature which initiates a boss battle. We defeat the creature which unlocks another trophy. We find out that this creature is called the Bell Beast, and after defeating it, we can now use it as a method of transportation across the map. Of course, we have to unlock the stations first. We do this by paying rosaries, one of 2 currencies available in the game. Rosaries will be needed a lot in this game because there will be a lot of things to purchase with them. They're mostly obtained from defeating certain enemies or opening particular chests that hold them. And as a warning, if you die, you'll lose all your rosaries unless you pick them up for the spot you died at. But if you die before them, they are lost permanently. This is partly what contributes to the game's difficulty, but more on that later. To the game, I take the Bell Beast back to Bone Bottom, which is the only other available station at this point. In the town, we see a wish board where most of the side quests will be located to start them. I look at one called Bone Bottom Repairs, which requires us to donate 200 shards, the other game's currency, to expand the place. Luckily we do have enough shards and donate the necessary amount, which lets us grant our first wish and unlocks a trophy for doing so. we progress through the game further and come across a new area called Deep Docks. This area will be important for other reasons later, but for now we just want to progress through it. After some exploration and obtaining new items including another silk skill, we encounter another boss called Lace. This will be the first of many if we want to obtain the Platinum Trophy. Lace also plays a significant part in the story later on, but we'll get to that when the time comes. We defeat her and another trophy pops for doing that before she flies away. After this, the trophies become scarcer for a while, as the focus will be on exploration and progression. During this time, I become more accustomed to Hornet's controls and the difference in game design compared to the first game. Firstly, Hornet is noticeably quicker when compared to the protagonist of the first game, but in response to this, the developers made sure that the enemies were more aggressive to match her. In some ways, it feels like how Bloodborne was in comparison to From Software's previous releases. Hornet arguably has a wider moveset too, which leads to greater versatility when it comes to approaching various fights, especially as we obtain more tools and abilities. While I appreciate this, it also leads to moments where I got overwhelmed by certain enemies as a result. This becomes more apparent later on. I am aware that most of my deaths in this game were the result of skill issues on my part rather than the game's design, so it's important that you understand how this game works early on, so you feel satisfied with your progress than it feeling like you're bashing your head against a wall over and over. The different areas of Pharloom are also designed with this more aggressive gameplay in mind. Most of the areas feel wider and sometimes are more vertical. While the game is bigger overall, I feel that there is enough variety that my experience never once felt bloated, so I must give the developers at Team Cherry credit for that. After making it through more areas such as Farfields and Greymore, and defeating a few bosses along the way, we enter the next area called Bellheart. The town and its residents are under some sort of curse which we need to break in order to progress with the main story. At the moment, we don't have any means to do that, so we enter the next areas, Shellwood and the Wormways. Here we acquire a fourth mask shard that increases our health as seen in the top left. This in turn pops another trophy for doing so. We'll also need to find all the mask shards for 100%, not only to maximize our health, but they're also needed to 100% the game. While exploring Shellwood, we obtain another silk skill called the Cling Grip. We use our newfound skill to enter Bellheart through another way. Shortly after doing this, we encounter the mastermind behind the situation, Widow. While I lost to her the first time, I did beat her on the second go. Doing this frees Bellheart and its residents. Bellheart is the second hub area of the game, and like Bone Bottom, we have various wishes to fulfill as well. Also, here one of the residents has the ability to upgrade Hornet's needle so she can deal more damage. He does this and tells her that he can upgrade the needle further if we can bring him pale oil from the Citadel above. We need to do this as not only can it make our life slightly easier in combat, it also is one of the requirements for 100%. Later on, while exploring, we encounter a mini dungeon of sorts where we face a gauntlet of enemies which we beat to acquire the prize at the end. This prize is called a crest which can change our playstyle if we equip it. Because that was the first one we obtained, we unlock a trophy for it. Again, getting all the crests will be needed for 100%. But wait, there's more. A short time later, I found the second of another item called the Spool Fragment. Spool Fragments can expand your spool as shown below your health. This gives Hornet the ability to use more of the skills she's learned throughout the game, so it's recommended that you find as many as you can so you have less of a need to recharge. We also pop another trophy for doing this the first time. Okay, so it's obvious at this point that a lot is required to 100% the game. By the way, all the stuff I've mentioned so far doesn't even cover all of the requirements. If you want to know all of the requirements, they are as follows. Acquire all tools. Acquire all silk skills. Acquire all crests. Acquire all core abilities. Acquire all crafting kits and pouch upgrades. These are mostly bought from various merchants throughout Pharloom. Acquire all silk hearts. These help you to regenerate more silk for Hornet skills. Acquire all health upgrades. Acquire all silk upgrades, aka the spool fragments, and acquire all weapon upgrades. So as you can see from an initial perspective, doing a sub 30-hour speedrun suddenly sounds more daunting than it first appeared, but I'll get to that when the time comes. This first playthrough is more about familiarizing myself with the game, so of course I'll take my time to understand Silksong's layout. Back to the game, I progressed through further areas including the Blasted Steps and Sinner's Road, before arriving at the gate to the Citadel. At this point, I've fulfilled all the criteria to open the gate, so it seems like it will open after playing a melody. Instead, another boss called the Last Judge appears and it takes me a good few attempts to beat him. But afterwards, the gate finally opens and I enter the Citadel for the first time. End of Act 1. At the start of Act 2, we finally enter the Citadel area. This area is just as complex and dangerous as the rest of Pharloom, with arguably more lethal enemies in some respects. Shortly in, we take a faulty elevator, which drops us into the Underwork section. This area will be key in the 5-hour speedrun, as it's home to multiple tools we need, as well as another Silk ability that's key to beating the game. It's also one of the more dangerous areas due to the abundance of enemies and that half of the floor is full of gears waiting to kill you. There is also where we first come across the first Ventrica station, which replaces the Bell Beast for the Citadel portion of the map. Before we continue, I wish to give Team Cherry credit for their art direction and enemy design. It all looks gorgeous and is clearly translated well into the game, making each area feel distinctly unique from a visual perspective. Nothing looks out of place and it all complements each other nicely. It shows you don't need 50 gigabytes of graphics to make a gorgeous game. Progressing through the game, we reach the Coral Chambers, which I spent some time exploring before I eventually reached the third and final hub area, Songclave. It's here that we learn more about the Citadel and who really runs the show. We also get another batch of wishes we'll need to grant, as well as another merchant to buy from after we save him. A little later, we find another area at the top of the Citadel called the Cogwork Core. We take on another boss known as the Cogwork Dancers before being told that in order to ascend to the top of the Citadel, we must learn the Threefold Song. As the name suggests, we need to find and learn 3 pieces to this melody, which are located throughout the Citadel. The first was into the Cogwork Core, which is attained after some platforming challenges and a melody puzzle. Admittedly, I died quite a few times in this area, although I would consider it the easiest of the 3 to find. The next one was in the neighbouring zone called the Whispering Vaults. This piece is attained after navigating through multiple areas, including the Underworks, White Ward, as well as a boss fight against one of the more interesting opponents, Trobio. While in the Whispering Vaults, I also obtained a trophy for finding half of the lost fleas in Pharloom. Quick side note, early on in the game you can access a wish in the Bone Bottom called the Lost Fleas. It requires you to find 5 lost fleas which are scattered throughout the map. Fleas are Silksong's version of collectibles which you need to find in order to give to the flea caravan. The fleas themselves don't contribute to 100%, but the rewards you receive from them after reaching various milestones do. These include a spool fragment and tool upgrades. At these milestones, the caravan will also change locations further into Pharloom, so it's important you keep track of how you're doing with regards to finding these fleas. Not long after finding the second piece to the Threefold Song, I made some progress in another side quest. This time, it involved a relic called the Hunter's Memento. In Greymore, at a place called the Halfway House, you can find a character called Nu, who will give you an item called the Hunter's Memento, which lets you record various creatures you fight in the game. The first of these requests requires you to record 100 enemies in the Memento. This is what happened while in the Whispering Vaults, so I travelled back to Nu where we finished the wish and are rewarded with a trophy for doing so. We will need to return the Hunter's Memento later, but for now I decided to progress further with the main story. The final piece of the Threefold Song is located in an area called the High Halls. This is by far the most difficult of the 3 pieces to attain, and it's all down to one section at the end which also happens to be a gauntlet. Gauntlets of enemies are a recurring theme in this game, and their abundance rivals that of bosses. I found them to be beatable in my first attempt. However, the High Halls Gauntlet takes the difficulty of gauntlets in this game in general to another level. Not only do you face more waves of enemies than normal, but you also face 2 HP sponges at the end who can decimate you if you're not prepared. Which, unfortunately for myself, I wasn't. On my first playthrough, this gauntlet took me longer than any other fight, bosses included, in the entire game. It took me nearly 4 hours to eventually beat. And while I can blame the difficulty for my struggles, at the end of the day it was my fault that this took so long. Since Hollow Knight Silksong is a Metroidvania, I could have just left to get stronger and find more items before returning to try again. There's even a bench at the Ventrica station nearby, so I wouldn't have lost any progress in the high halls. But no, because of my own pride and arrogance, I kept bashing my head against the wall until I eventually won with the help of the cogwork wheel item against the final wave. In gaming, my own arrogance has cost me time, especially in games like Elden Ring where I refuse to leave until the boss is defeated, often to my own detriment. So a word of advice, when you play this game, use your tools. They will help you avoid so much pain, and you have so many to choose from, especially at this point in the story. And unfortunately, this happened more than a couple of times in Silksong, but I'll get to those soon. Anyway, after attaining the final part of the threefold song, I now had the option to go back to the cogwork core and ascend to the top of the Citadel. Although after what happened in the high halls, I was worried that I would face a similar experience if I rushed back to the core, so I decided to continue exploring and filling out the map in order to get stronger. During my time, I found another ability called the Fey Down Cloak in a zone called Mount Fey, which is basically a double jump. I wish I had this ability before taking on the High Halls Gauntlet in all honesty. With that I was able to reach places I couldn't have done before, and more upgrades followed as a result. During my exploration, I found another area called the Memoriam, where I unlocked the final Ventrica station, which popped another trophy for doing so. I also found another place called Bilewater, which quickly became my least favourite area in the entire game. Not only is there poison everywhere, which inhibits your healing ability, but there are also plenty of flying enemies which can land multiple hits on you if you're not careful. To top it all off, at the end of the area is one of the most annoying bosses in the entire game. Not only do you have to face a gauntlet before he appears, but you then also have to face some of his more unpredictable attacks, while hoping you don't accidentally fall into the maggot-infested waters. And if you die, the run back is diabolical given when the nearest bench is located. Get ready to spend a lot of time here if you're not ready. This was another example of my pride becoming before reasonable thought. However, I did come across an item which would be more important later on for one of the endings. After a while, I decided that I had upgraded enough to the point where I could tackle the final part of Act 2. So I returned to the cogwork core and played the threefold song, which in turn opened up the elevator that took Hornet to an area called the Cradle. Here we find Lace again, who we fight before defeating her again, where she congratulates us and warns us about the threat ahead. Another trophy pops for defeating her in the Cradle. Hornet ascends to the top of the Cradle, where we face the final boss of Act 2, Grandmother Silk. After an interesting fight, we defeat her. Afterwards, we unlock the first ending, Weaver Queen, which pops another trophy after the credits roll for the first time. With one ending done, it was time to work towards the others. We respawned back just before the final boss of Act 2, so we left the Cradle and continued wandering Pharloom. While exploring further, I found another area called the Putrefied Ducts. Here I unlocked the final bell station, which popped a trophy for doing so. While in Bilewater, I found an item called the Twisted Bud, which doesn't stop screaming in the menu when you found it. This actually tied into one of the other endings. For this ending, you need to take the Twisted Bud to an NPC who will use it to inflict a curse upon you.
That's fine.
This cast doesn't let you heal or use items. With that in mind, I went back to fight Grandmother Silk again. With my previous experience fighting her in mind, she went down pretty easily despite Hornet's cursed state. Here, we unlocked the second ending and the trophy, Twisted Child. Back into the Citadel, we needed to fulfill certain conditions in order to attain the next ending. First, this involved finishing all the wishes in the 3 hub areas. This in turn unlocked a wish in Songclave called Silken Soul. We must require 3 particular items found in Pharloom. Ironically, we had already found one of them after fighting that annoying boss in Bilewater. 2 of the other items can be gathered from particular NPCs in Moss Grotto and Bellheart. The final item is linked to finding all the fleas. When you've found enough fleas, the caravan will move to its final location in the Putrefied Ducts. Here, you will find an NPC who can give you maps to find the remaining fleas. This is important for a couple of reasons. Finding all the fleas will cause the leader of the flea caravan to give you the final item needed for the Silken Soul wish. I also obtained a trophy for finding all the fleas too. While exploring the Whiteward section in search of a flea, I came across a secret boss. Defeating him causes him to drop a silk heart, which for me happened to be the final one I needed in the game, which popped another trophy. With all the necessary items obtained, I returned to Songclave to finish the wish. I then had to go back to the cradle where I took on Grandmother Silk again. This time, instead of binding her, I used the needle in which opened up the void to pull in Grandmother Silk. Unfortunately, Hornet couldn't escape until Lace came in and saved her. However, Lace gets pulled in with Grandmother Silk instead before the void closes. Hornet falls off the ledge and into the Citadel below, and black tendrils sprout out of the ground, infecting the entirety of Pharloom. We also pop another trophy for obtaining this ending. End of Act 2. Completing that ending results in unlocking the secret Act 3, so welcome to the rest of the game. We wake up in the cradle before making our way down, where we fight a mini gauntlet where all the enemies have been infected by the void. This is the case for all of Act 3, making Pharloom harder to traverse than ever. We beat those enemies before making it back to the coral chambers before passing out. We wake up in Songclave before leaving to find some answers. With parts currently blocked off, Hornet arrives at the Grand Bellway station, only for the Bell Beast to not be there. Instead, we end up in a fight with a different creature entirely, which we beat before the Bell Beast reappears to finish it off. We also acquire a new power where we can fast travel to a station we most recently used. With this, I arrive back in Bone Bottom before arriving at a chapel in the Mossy area. Here we find out some answers and decide to travel to the Abyss through the Deep Docks to find Lace. There, we discover that we can't reach Lace in our current state as she is enshrouded in the void. In the Abyss, Hornet is able to bind another silk skill called the Silk Saw. This silk skill will access the remaining areas of the game. We also find an item called the Farsight, which is very useful for achieving 100%. Back at the chapel, the shamans there suggest that they craft the Everbloom, which can resist the void. In order to obtain it, however, Hornet must retrieve the hearts of fallen rulers across Pharloom. While in the chapel, we find a secret tunnel. At the end of said tunnel, we found the last crest, which when binding popped another trophy for finding all of them. Crafting the Farsight, as mentioned earlier, will give you an indication of how much of the game you have completed percentage-wise. This is one of the most useful tools in the game, and will be a key component towards the end of the 100% speedrun later. For now though, I continued exploring while trying to retrieve the hearts along the way. One of the new areas was a place in the cradle. When we make it to the top, we can bind with Grandmother Silk's arm that Lace cut off to acquire the final silk skill. This also pops a trophy as well. Act 3 in general is noticeably harder in comparison to Act 2, and that extends to some of the bosses and gauntlets. From my experience, this was the most apparent in the Coral Tower section. After the High Halls gauntlet, this was the longest fight for me, including the bosses. Before you can even fight the boss, you have to face 4 different waves as you ascend the tower. At this point, I had also about 90% of the items as well, so I didn't have an excuse to go back and try again later. The third room in particular is dastardly. Not only do you have to face some of the most dangerous enemies in the game, but the floor also becomes unusable for some sections while having to deal with flying enemies. Eventually though, I was able to progress past the third room and was able to create a shortcut back to the beginning, so I would never have to do that again in this run. The fourth room wasn't too bad, and I was able to reach the boss. Ironically, this boss was actually one of the easiest in the entire game for me. I beat him on my second attempt to mixed feelings and acquired the first heart. I made further progress at both the Grand Hall and the Far Fields areas that were previously inaccessible where the other hearts were located. I was able to beat the boss in Grand Hall relatively quickly. However, the boss in the Far Fields, Skarsing Carmelita, was a different story. In my opinion, she was the hardest boss in the entire game, but despite this, I never found her to be frustrating or annoying. Her attacks are deadly, but there are ways to mitigate them if you know what you're doing. All my deaths were due to skills on my own part. This fight was the definition of challenging, but fair, and one of my favourites in the entire game. After defeating her, I acquired the final heart necessary for the Everbloom. Before returning to the chapel, I undertook a quest in the final unexplored area, Bedania. This quest isn't required for 100% if you've already found the necessary hearts. Although, during this side quest through the Fallen Kingdom, I found the map for this area, which was the last one in the game, and I popped a trophy for acquiring all the maps in the game. There are 29 in total. Bedania does have an interesting story behind it if you're interested in the lore. Otherwise, you can just progress through it normally once you've found the map. Back at the chapel, with the help of the shamans, Hornet delves deep into her memories, where we see her past before retrieving the Everbloom. With this, another trophy pops for doing so. Before descending back to the Abyss, there were a couple of queries to wrap up. The first of those was a side mission called Passing of the Age, which required finding the mushroom-shaped herald at various points across the map. He is key to one of the remaining 2 endings. Once we wrapped that up, we went to an area next to the moss fields and encountered a character called Eva. With her, if you find all the crests and unlock enough tool slots using memory lockets that are found throughout the world, she will bind to Hornet. After this, Hornet gains an additional ability to recharge silk at all benches. We can also obtain another trophy for doing this. With those done, we return to the Abyss for one final encounter. This time, with the power of the Everbloom, we are unaffected by the Void and reach the bottom. Here, we fight Lace one more time. This time, she has been corrupted by the Void, and we must defeat her to save her and free Pharloom. This fight is one of the toughest in the game, but after everything we've been through to get here, we're not giving up now. With our final battle done, we watched the remainder of the story, as well as witness the final 2 endings back to back. This was followed by 2 trophies for each ending. As you can see, while we've acquired all the endings after 58 hours, our journey is still not done as I'm only on 91%. We jumped back into the game, and in the next few hours I wrapped up the remainder of the requirements for completion. These include finding the remaining tools, finding the remaining mask shards, and finding the remaining spool fragments. I kept looking until the far side showed I was at 100%. I made a note of all the locations I missed on my way for future speedruns, and returned to the Void again. I jumped back in and defeated Lace once more. After the credits rolled again, the final screen showed 100% and a trophy popped for achieving this. Despite this, we were not done yet with the save file. There was still one more task, which was to do with the Hunter's Memento. This was my least favourite part of the entire Platinum journey. Remember New from earlier? Now we have to fill the remainder of the Hunter's Journal. However, we can't just beat every enemy once. We have to do it multiple times in some cases. which means going to areas and defeating the same enemies over and over again until the far sight shows we have defeated enough for the journal. This was very tedious and not fun after the 60 plus hours of enjoyment previously. However, I followed through with it until the journal was complete. I returned to Nu to show her, and we finally received the Hunter's Memento, which in turn popped a trophy for it. This just left 2 trophies remaining. Both of them were for speedrunning the game. One was for beating the game in under 5 hours. The other one was 100%ing the game and beating it in under 30 hours. Given what I said previously, those tasks sounded daunting, especially the 30-hour one. But luckily, having already attained 100% once, the knowledge of my first playthrough would come in handy for the speedruns. I decided to start with the 5-hour speedrun first. This can be used with any ending, so it just meant up until the end of Act 2. I started a new file and began the journey again. In general, I'm not particularly good with speedruns, so this first run was intended to be used as a practice run. Here, I would highlight my mistakes and learn from them for the next run. Unfortunately, my footage for this run did get corrupted, so I can't show you how it went, but I eventually beat the game in 5 hours and 40 minutes. During this run, I made some costly mistakes, particularly in the Citadel section. More specifically, during the High Halls Gauntlet, which was part of what I was most concerned about. I spent an hour on this section alone, as I was more concerned with just trying to beat it. Eventually, I knew this wouldn't work, so I went out and upgraded the Hornet's Needle, as well as acquire an item that I knew would be useful. These delays would be costly, hence why I failed this first run. With my mistakes in mind, I devised a strategy to approach the next attempt. This involved finding the pale oil in the Whispering Vaults area to upgrade the needle, while I was looking for a piece of the Threefold Song. Early on, I would also buy one of the craft metal pieces in the Bone Bottom shop. With that, when I reached the Underworks, I would use it to craft the Cogwork Wheel, which is so useful against that last wave in the High Halls. I would also open strategic benches, bell stations, and ventricles where necessary, so I could save and exit and respawn back at the bench to save time. That strategy would also be useful on the 30-hour speedrun. With all that considered, I began the next run. This time, since I knew what I was doing, I made significant progress. I still lost to some bosses due to the pressure. In particular, I lost a fair few times to Throbio, but I didn't lose as much time as the first run. What shocked me the most, however, was that I beat the High Halls Gauntlet on my first go. It was genuinely satisfying to see something that had once given me so much grief go down easily. It was here that I had learned something. The game didn't get easier, you got better. This is the satisfaction of learning from your mistakes, improving, and making amends. This is the joy of overcoming a challenge. Back to the run, I acquired the final piece of the Threefold Song and proceeded up to the cradle. I beat Lace on my first go, and Grandmother Silk fell shortly afterwards. The final time for this run was 4 hours. As a result, the trophy popped, and I had only one remaining. All that was left was to achieve 100% in under 30 hours. It sounds difficult after everything I had mentioned earlier, but there was light at the end of the tunnel. My first playthrough was blind, so I didn't know where anything was. Now that I did have the knowledge of where everything was and which areas were more difficult, I could use that to my advantage. I decided to go back to my first speedrun profile as I felt it would be the best option. Then, I immediately went to Mount Fae to acquire the Faenown Cloak. At just under 4.5 hours, I had all the abilities up to Act 2 which I could use. It's interesting, as at this point in my first run, I was still navigating the far fields. Firstly, I decided to prioritize doing wishes in the 3 hub areas, which do have their own rewards, so I could access the Silken Soul quest early. I also worked on one zone at a time, starting with the Marrow, and acquired everything needed for 100% before moving to the next area. I also made sure to go easier areas first, so I could attain health and silk upgrades to make the harder areas more bearable. For the most part, this strategy worked. Some areas would take less than 15 minutes to clear, meaning that I would never have to go back to them again. I was actually satisfied to see the results of my development through my time with the game. It was until I got to Bylewater. I intentionally saved this area as one of the last ones due to the difficulties I had suffered on the first time. And despite my knowledge of the area from my first playthrough, I still struggled, especially with the boss fight and run back as mentioned earlier. I spent almost 2 hours in Bylewater alone, and I was getting nervous that it would cost me the run. Since it was one of the last areas, I also couldn't go back and get much stronger. This was the closest I'd felt to actually hitting a wall. I told myself to keep calm and composed, reminding myself that I had already beaten this place once and I could do it again. And eventually I was able to beat that part and acquire the item needed for the Silken Soul Wish. I checked how long my run had been so far and saw that I still had enough time thanks to the strategy I had formulated. There wasn't much left in Act 2 afterwards, so I did the remaining tasks and beat Grandmother Silk one more time to reach Act 3. In Act 3, I immediately prioritized the story up until I reached the Abyss to attain the Silk Saw and Farsight. I crafted the Farsight and it showed me what was still left to find. I decided to focus on attaining the remaining items in Pharloom that were previously inaccessible, such as the last mask shards and tools. The bosses here also didn't give me as much grief as before either. Even Carmelita didn't take as many attempts as before. When I reached 99%, the only remaining factor towards it was the Everbloom, which is done through the main story. And with the determination building inside me, I acquired the remaining hearts needed to create the Everbloom. To my surprise, I was able to beat the Coral Tower on my second go. Again, I felt the results of my growth during my time with Silksong. I acquired the Everbloom shortly afterwards and made my way to the Abyss for one final showdown. I fought Lost Lace one final time and was able to beat her on my third attempt. I witnessed the ending and watched the credits roll once more. I beat this game in a time of 22 hours and 30 minutes. The final trophy popped, the Platinum trophy popped, and my journey was over. Over 100 hours later, and was the Silksong Platinum worth it? From a personal perspective, it was absolutely worth it. But I realized that everything I mentioned may not be worth it to someone else who doesn't want to invest the time and effort I did. Platinuming this game felt similar to when I platinumed Bloodborne or Elden Ring. The satisfaction of overcoming a challenge like this always feels rewarding, and it shows you can overcome any challenge that stands in your way. With a game like Hollow Knight Silksong, it truly is a beautiful monster to experience. As a side note, I am aware that other platforms include achievements that involve beating the game on Steel Soul mode, which is the game's permadeath mode. I wonder if Sony had any say on these being omitted from the trophy list. Anyway, in your opinion, does the omission of those achievements come at the detriment of the Platinum trophy, or is it fine? Congratulations anyway to the legends who have been able to pull off those feats. To wrap up, I'll just say that Hollow Knight Silksong is a must-play for any gamer out there, regardless of whether you plan to get 100% or not. It's an example of what unlimited passion and talent, especially from a small team like Team Cherry, can accomplish. And while I loved Expedition 33, Hollow Knight Silksong is my frontrunner for Game of the Year, and it has also become one of my favourite games of all time. Thank you so much for watching, you absolute legends, and good luck on your gaming journey. Be sure to like and subscribe.